Bow, bow, bow. Bow, bow, bow. Kevin! Yo! Come on, we gotta start. Time to start. Our audience is waiting. Oh, sorry if that popped your ears. Oh. What's up? All right, I'm back. I'm back. Kevin. I'm back. Back. What's that song?
Eminem song? I've been trying to play that on the lyre, actually. Wait, are you singing the Eminem song? What are you singing? Is that an Eagles song?
Stop it.
Is it?
Hold on, why isn't this going? This is weird. Hold on, let me see if I can.
It's probably.
I should have a picture here. Where's my picture?
Is it the Eagles?
Stop.
Can't tell why you're mad, but.
You know why I'm mad.
Is it because?
Oh, we're here. All right, good.
Because you're
That was
a
weird.
Eminem fan and
Huh?
you're wondering why I'm confused?
Is that an Emmett? Did he
sampled that song.
Did he sample that song?
No,
No, that's a different song. No, that's not it. That's not it.
Oh, what are you saying?
Dun, dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun,
Yeah.
dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun. No, that's a different song.
Well, in the Eminem version, I think he's just like humming that.
Oh.
It's like kind of,
It's an AC/DC. It's
Oh,
Back
it's
in Black.
interesting. I never made that connection.
What's the name of his song?
I'm back.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's funny. I like that. I would have never made that connection. And I like AC/DC too. Like I used to listen to that song all the time.
Apparently not.
Back in Black is a good song.
I mean,
It's like
it's
number
one of the
for-
best songs like ever in all of rock and roll.
Like if you need a song to enter into a gym while listening to, like that's one of the best ones. Like you open the door and you're like ready to go.
That
Ready
fires
to
you
go.
up. That
Yeah.
is a fire up song.
Yeah, that's a song like they play to soldiers and stuff when they're going out to
Like
you know,
kill and
kill
die.
people.
Yes. That's a great song.
That statement might be slightly influenced by the Iron Man movies as well.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Now was there a black Iron Man?
War Machine.
No, I mean like the actual armor. I know there was a black Iron Man, but
The closest would be
but I mean
War
like
Machine.
a black armor. Like like Spider-Man has a black
Yeah.
Venom.
I think like
I have that comic book. I have the #1
Have you seen
appearance
it? Anyway.
of Venom.
like first edition.
Like I
Print?
bought it from the newsstand when I was like 12 years old.
That's awesome.
I also have a couple. I don't know if they're not first edition ever. I have a couple very early, and they may be reprints. I'm not sure. Of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I got a bunch
Like
of
the
them.
black and white ones.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean,
Like,
I don't know if they're legit or not, because you don't know, like, because they have reprints and whatever. But I bought those off the stand when they came out.
Oh, that's awesome.
Not the original ones that they did, like before they got like picked up.
Yeah, the ones that got popular.
Like when they were able to go onto the newsstands, like I got those.
Yeah.
And I still have them somewhere, unless my mother sold them on eBay or something.
Was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Was that Frank Miller?
No,
Who was that?
Eastman, and I know one of them name was Eastman. I don't know who the other one was.
Yeah, I really no. It was a commentary on Frank Miller's Daredevil. That's what it was.
Oh, Daredevil was another. I loved Daredevil so much when I was a kid. I thought Daredevil was so Daredevil.
Oh, no wonder you became a lawyer.
Well, I mean, it was not because he was a lawyer that I thought Daredevil was cool. But I
Yeah.
thought Daredevil was like Marvel's answer to Batman.
Yep.
But and the thing is, when I got to Daredevil as a kid, it was dark. Like, I remember the first Daredevil comic that I ever bought was him getting his ass beat by like a biker gang, basically just getting like chained,
Yeah.
like beat up bad. I was like, what? Like, I don't think I'd had a comic book where you saw somebody just get a beat down. And
That
then, of
sounds
course,
like Frank Miller.
huh?
That sounds like Frank Miller.
I think it was Frank Miller. It may have been. I don't know exactly. But
around.
there were some dark ones. That was kind of like. We talked about Clint Eastwood earlier today, another series of his films, but on a pale horse. Have you ever seen that one? I think, there's a couple different ones, but that one there's a couple different ones where he's like this vengeful thing. But pale horse or pale rider, it was pale rider. That's the thing. Because on a pale horse is death, right? Like in the Bible.
That makes sense.
But they call him Pale Rider. The movie's Pale Rider, and what it is it starts off. I remember watching this as a kid. There's a sheriff in a town, and the townspeople wind up like essentially hiring this gang to come and kill the sheriff of the town. And they all basically almost all the townspeople either witness this and say nothing, right? Like they all chip in to hire this gang to come kill the sheriff because.
Is that like the Magnificent Seven type thing?
I don't remember Magnificent Seven that much. That was Seven Samurai too, right? That was the bait. I don't remember the actual plot of Seven Samurai.
Seven Samurai, I believe, was bandits, and like a bunch of poor villagers got together and paid for the seven or the.
No, this is the opposite. This would be like if the villagers got like annoyed with the samurai and hired some bandits to come murder the samurai.
Yeah.
So anyway, they murder the sheriff, and then after like a couple, like I think it's a year or 2 years or whatever, this guy shows up out of the blue, and he essentially just takes over the town, and he starts, making people feel really uncomfortable. But they're worried because the bandits that murdered the sheriff are coming back, and they're owed money, and the townspeople are like worried because these guys go to jail, and so. They're worried that the bandits are going to come back and like take it out on them because they've been in jail.
Yeah.
So they ask this guy for help, and unbeknownst to them, like he's this spirit essentially that has come back for vengeance against everybody.
Yeah.
And just like totally wrecks everybody.
So he takes vengeance against the townspeople for killing the sheriff.
He just takes them apart. He just wrecks everyone. And there's a few people in the town who are more or less innocent, or at least not blameworthy, and he doesn't hurt them, but everybody else he just really picks them apart, and it's awesome. This guy he has a couple different versions of this story, or the kind of iterations on this type of story, this vengeance story.
Yeah.
More or less, I think it's in kind of the middle of his career, but that movie, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. Super dark, and that was like Daredevil.
Yeah.
But it's kind of that same, ethos, or same not ethos, but same kind of sensibility. Oh, I have something I want to chit chat today. I've been thinking out loud. It kind of dovetails with what we were talking about.
Is it about vengeance?
No, but we can talk about vengeance later.
That'd be good.
It's only good. Vengeance is only good if you're a spirit. If you're some sort of revenant or something from the underworld, then you don't have to deal with
consequences.
The consequences of vengeance.
Yeah. Probably when it's most appropriate.
No, I wanted to so on Thursday, I think it was Thursday, maybe it was Wednesday, we were talking about what were we talking about?
I forget.
I think something about like marksmanship and equipment and all this stuff and what you need to get started.
Oh yeah.
But I was reading or watching another thing, and it just reminded me of another point that I wanted to make. So, I'm on this shooting kick, this marksmanship thing, and I was reading or watching videos about one of the most famous snipers of all time, who is this Finnish guy named, I'm probably gonna mess up his name, Simo Hayha, the White Death.
Yeah.
All right. Have you heard of this guy? He killed between it's like not counting because he had a submachine gun too. He killed a lot of Russians.
So like
in 3 months, he's in Finland. The Russians come in, and in 3 months, he kills between 200 and 500. I've heard something that's close to 900.
Yeah.
He himself, in his diaries, estimates about 500. Historians say it's probably closer to 200. Whatever, right? A lot of people. He killed a lot of Russians.
Are they confirmed kills or just?
Well, let's see. That's the dispute, right? Like, so he had his confirmed and confirmed by his, saw people around him.
Yeah.
Who saw whatever happened.
Yeah.
And so that probably is somewhere low estimate around 200. His own estimate. Now this is unconfirmed, right? This is like I took a shot.
It was like him out in the field with
doing whatever. Maybe it was unconfirmed. Maybe somebody he saw them get shot or whatever, but they didn't die right away in front of him.
Yeah.
But that was closer to 500. Historians go back and they look at like the casualties, the records of casualties in the Russian army during this period, and they're like, I mean, if that's true, then he accounted personally for 20% of the casualties. And they're like, that seems a bit high, but
yeah,
that's not a refutation. That's just a maybe not, right?
It
Low count is 200. Let's say it's 200.
Yeah.
In 3 months.
Yeah.
And there's no dispute that he killed 25 in one day with his rifle, not those machine gun.
Was he the representative of a team of people like Dave Matthews Band?
No. Well, he was. He did command at least a unit, but when he was moving around with his unit, he would use a submachine gun. He wasn't. Yeah. He can't. It's harder to snipe, I think, at least in those days. But what interests me about him was that a couple things. The first thing is that he used. So he was his mandatory service back in Finland, and I'm sure he is today too. They had to give 1 year. So about 15 years before the Russians invaded, he had done a year of mandatory service. They had given him a rifle at that time and trained him. Mm-hmm. And he had gone off afterwards, and for about 14, 15 years, he had just gone back to farming and, hunting, like what you would do if you were Finland. But I mean, he was always a good shot. Like he was always, from day up as a young kid, always a remarkable shot. And somebody said, I was reading about him, said that he was able to calculate distance by eye within a meter up to 150 meters. So, I mean, that doesn't sound like, that much.
That sounds cool.
But, being able to gauge things by eye, up to 150 is not bad.
Yeah.
It's not bad. The other thing about him was that he didn't use a scope. He used iron sights, which are just like the
crosshairs.
The crosshairs there's like a circle and then there's like it's like a circle and then there's like a little bit of a dot, like a metal protuberance. So you could kind of line up your sight. But it wasn't a scope, and the reason he did that was he hadn't been trained on a scope when he first learned, so he had never hunted with a scope. Mm-hmm. He wasn't comfortable doing that. But the second thing was that he knew from going out and killing other snipers that it was very easy to spot them because of the glint. And the other thing was that when you use a scope, your head you have to expose yourself. Your head has to come up higher than what you would do with an iron sight. And so he, amongst many other things that he did, he would not use a scope. He never used a scope, and he used his old. I think he used his old rifle. It was like it wasn't the the best, the newest rifle that you could buy. It was a 20-year-old rifle probably. And what it made me think about was his using, and the other thing that he would do is he would be very selective about when he went out, right? So he would focus on early morning or sun up and sundown, because that was when people were the most unguarded, right? You just woke up and you're just going to go to bed, right? Or you're turning in, and so that's when he would kind of attack. But what it made me think about was, now he was a remarkable person, but he was also kind of unorthodox in the sense that the things that he did were not typical at that time period. He was kind of old-fashioned in a way.
What do you mean?
I mean, he was using an old gun, no scope, unlike everybody else out in the field, right? And he was selective about when he was targeting people, right? He wasn't just going out and being like, oh, I have a scope, I can just shoot from here, because he knew that every time he went out, he was in danger of dying, essentially, right? Yeah. And so being concealed and being careful, it was a little bit more, he killed a lot of people just by doing it the old-fashioned way. Yeah. He was highly effective. It was not like he had the best equipment or whatever. He had practiced a long time. He was good at what he did. He kind of stayed within. He wasn't like, oh, let me get the most powerful rifle, or oh, let me get the most powerful optic, or you know what I'm saying? Like he had his way that he was extremely comfortable with, a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit unorthodox for that time, right? He was about 15 years behind sort of the technology of the time, and yet incredibly successful, right? And it just made me think of how do you apply that same kind of thinking, right? There's always this idea of, well, I want to do the latest thing.
Yeah.
I want to be, up to speed with, whatever the current fad is, right? And I can tell you, and I'm sure you can attest to this fact too, you got some guys that are running around who don't do anything fancy. They don't do any the newest things. They just do one or two, maybe even old-fashioned things really, really well, and they are very difficult to handle, right, on the mat. And I think this is true for almost kind of any sport, if you will, right? I mean, you can, if your fundamentals are sound, you can do something that is not, we talk about meta all the time, right? You can do something that is non-meta. As long as your fundamentals are sound, you can be extremely successful. And the other thing that made me think of was, and this is just me thinking out loud, is, let's say if you're above average athletically, right? Super explosive, super strong, I don't have to be as technical, right? I don't have to do the latest and greatest, fad of jiu-jitsu, right? I don't have to do leg locks, or I don't have to do them that well. I can do them, I just, because I'm so strong, or I'm so explosive, or I'm whatever it is, right? If you're average, right? You're average in all these things, in your attributes. If you do the typical meta, right? You're probably going to get average results. Not to say bad results, right? But if I'm average, and then I just do the meta, right? I just play whatever the meta is. I just subscribe to that, right? I'm going to do whatever it is today, right? Like leg locks.
That's the meta?
The meta now depends on where you are, right? Depends if you're gi, no gi. If you're gi, it's still very much De La Hiva. De La Hiva, bare minimum, right? Leg drags. No gi, I think the meta is most definitely leg attacks. And back attacks, right? I mean, you still see guys who are, that's part of the counter meta, right? Which is guys going for legs and people taking the backs off the leg attacks. Kenan Duarte, you see Roberto Jimenez. These guys are taking backs off of leg attacks. But the top guys in trying to think of any top level grappler who's not adept at leg attacks and back.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's where where I'm getting confused on the metaphor. Where is the White Death guy, is he an average person?
Well, that's why I wanted to say that he could range things. He was highly trained. His fundamentals were very sound. He was not this. He wasn't like here, dude, have a rifle, go off and start shooting, right? And he was like, oh, I'll just do a couple things and that'll fix everything. This guy was legit from day one. He was an excellent marksman from day one. So that gets to the fundamentals point, right? Like, you can't just do counter and expect to be successful if your fundamentals are not rock solid.
True.
Right? You can see somebody like Cobrinha Jr., right? He's a guy who is very fundamentally sound. And I don't see him he'll take backs, but he's not like a leg attacker. But he'll pass the guard, like he did this to Gio Martinez, who's very much into the leg lock game. And he just basically picked him apart. I think the Ruotolo twins are also very much like this. They are despite some of the things that they do that are unorthodox, they are very fundamentally sound. They're not always going for leg attacks. They can, but they're much more about we just want to take you back, or we want to pass your guard, get cross-side. When you make a mistake, they'll take you back.
What about, can we look at the opponent? The White Death's opponent, would you consider that, if you were to make an analogy, would it be closer to Andre versus Gordon, where they're both super technical, super into their fundamentals, and they're both
I don't know the quality of Russian troops that went into to Finland at the time.
I have an idea, and it's
probably not the highest quality.
So that's the thing, right? This guy has solid
home court advantage.
But this guy has less equipment, but he's able to get by on fundamentals and less superior equipment because the enemy is not the strongest possible enemy?
I think, well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know that we can test that. I don't think that's like a non-testable. He did wind up getting shot. He got shot in the face at one point. I mean, the pictures you see are like him pretty bad.
What about like the American military? Do they let people use old equipment just because they're really good?
My understanding is that you use what you're issued.
Yeah.
You know, you don't, and that can be good or bad, right? Like the American military is not, unless you're at a very high level, you're probably not getting. If you're a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret, you probably get to use whatever you want.
Well, that's the thing. That was like we're talking about high level people. Like, I don't know. I guess that would be interesting. I don't know enough about the military to really ask this line of questions anyway.
I mean, you have to know. I don't care what you have to know how to you have to know your equipment.
Yeah.
Right. You have to really be familiar with what you're using. Right. You just can't. Yeah. I mean, if you just throw a rifle at somebody and say, "Hey, go," if they're an experienced person, they're probably going to be able to do pretty okay. But there's going to be quirks in that weapon that could kill. It could wind up with them dying. If they're not careful.
I feel like the thought that if you're really good at like fundamental jiu-jitsu, you're only good at like 6 moves. That's a solid strategy to beat pretty much everybody who doesn't train and most people who do a little bit, right? Like if you have like a really solid just like line of attack, I think that is something that matches more with like the self-defense idea where you like have like a small toolbox of really, really sharp, useful tools.
Yeah.
As opposed to where like training for tournament style jiu-jitsu, I don't think that strategy
Well,
would pan out.
when you look, I can think of several competitors who their games did not change all that much over the years.
Sure.
Hodger was never known as. If you go back and look at his earliest, black belt matches or brown belt matches, he doesn't look any different than his black belt matches. Marcelo, his techniques, he used a pretty small subset of techniques, very, successfully against a large group of people.
Is that still possible now?
Gordon Ryan does basically the same shit. Gary does some flashy stuff and is kind of unpredictable, but he goes back to he's got his meat and potatoes.
I wouldn't say Gordon uses fundamentals though. His float pass style is not something you would find.
Well, it's not just, the thing is about him is that he's not just a float passer. He uses float passing against a particular type of guard or against a certain type of reaction to his other ways of passing. So he's not like, he uses float passing, but he's not like, I'm going to float pass everybody.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on what you give him. I mean, he can pass you other ways. Sometimes he doesn't even pass. He just puts the pressure on you until you turn.
But like he's still willing to adapt, right?
Well, but what does he do? Almost every match, he comes out and he sits down.
Yeah.
Almost every match, he's going to start on the bottom. Right? That doesn't mean that he can't. I mean, I've seen him stand and then he goes back down. But I think you can look at him, and he's famous for this, right? He's famous for it's kind of hard to kind of judge, but because he goes out and he does something, then he puts a DVD out or an instruction. So it's not, his stuff is pretty, I want to say there's definitely a formula. I don't mean to say it's like a set formula, but he does a lot of the same things over and over and over again. And that's not to mean to say, that's not to say that he doesn't evolve. Because Marcelo had to evolve too. He went in the first Abu Dhabi, arm dragged everyone, took everyone's backs, and won Abu Dhabi the first time. The second time, everybody did this. Honestly. Yeah. And then he had to adapt. Now he started doing guillotines because he couldn't arm drag anymore, right? So before, people would be doing this, he'd arm drag them, take their back. Yeah. Later, they're doing this. He snaps and goes to guillotines and became very famous for his guillotines. And then all of a sudden you had to come up and then he would pick up your leg, he would run the pipe on you, so he had to adapt too. But these were almost like a linear kind of, okay, you didn't know I was going to do this, I killed all of you. Yeah. Then you guys looked at the tape and realized that you can't let me arm drag you, so now I'm going to do something else. But his sweeps that he would use were remarkably consistent.
Not fundamental though.
No, well, I wouldn't say, well, when you say fundamental, I would say that they weren't in common usage, right? X-guard was not something that was widely used, but it is a fundamentally sound sweep, or guard.
Now it is.
Well, I mean, it's fundamentally sound. It works, right, against a large group of people, and it still works today. People still use it all the time.
Just because they're fundamentally sound.
It wasn't known as fundamental.
They're not. If you were to say present me a list of all the fundamental jiu-jitsu techniques, X-guard would not be.
No, but I'm not saying it's a fundamental technique. It certainly wasn't a commonplace technique. It was very unique to him at the time. Yeah. I don't mean fundamental in terms of whether the technique would have been characterized as that. I mean, is the technique fundamental in its application? Right? In other words, so I would say there are certain techniques that are novel and they get a lot of mileage for a little while because of their novelty.
Simply because people aren't aware of them.
Right, I don't mean to say that arm drag isn't fundamental. It's fundamental wrestling. It's fundamental grappling.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not something you can just if I decide I'm not going to get arm dragged, I have to pay a price.
Yes.
Right. I have to open up my neck. Right. I can't use my arms the way I would normally do it. I have to keep my elbows tight, which, I mean, this is not bad defensively, but I'm not going to make a lot of offensive moves with this kind of T-Rex type of stuff. Right. What I mean by fundamental is it's fundamentally sound in the sense that it is something that can be used across. It's both gi and no gi. You still see it today by a lot of different athletes. It's not something that's like a trick or something that just it works a couple times because it's really novel, like the baseball
from bottom,
right? That's, I don't want to say it's fundamentally unsound. It's a good technique in the sense that you can get it. It's just not something that's going to work across for a very long time.
Yeah.
You're going to hit it a couple times against people who aren't paying attention, and then it's just going to get shut down.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't mean you can't win, or does you know what I mean? That's how I'm using fundamental, not in terms of was it on everybody's fundamental basic jiu-jitsu list? No, obviously not.
Yeah.
Probably still isn't.
Do you think?
But my point is if you, and again, I'm not sure this is true or not. It's just something that occurs to me. If I'm just an more or less average, if I just do the average, what everybody's doing, almost by definition, I'm going to get average results.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Right? It just seems why I have to do something different, right? I have to add something different into the mix, because if I'm just an average person doing the average game with an average ability, then people, just by virtue of the familiarity with the techniques, are going to take me apart.
Well, that reminds me, when white belts when white belts start training, right? They learn techniques, and they're because first it starts they can't do anything, and they start to learn things, and then after a couple months, you ask them to do a knee drive pass, and they can do a knee drive pass.
Yep.
But ask them to do it in a roll, and they still can't do the knee drive pass. And they're even though they're familiar with the fundamentals, the fact that they only know this thing makes it so that it's not going to work.
Right.
And so if you're only doing the things that you learn from your teacher, and you're only rolling with the people who also learn from your teacher,
you're not going to get very far.
You're not going to get far, even if you do it perfectly.
Yeah.
If that's the only thing you know how to do, it's going to be easy to stop.
Because you're one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone knows that dimension.
But that's also
But you could be Nicky Rodriguez.
Yes.
And just do vicious, crazy knee cuts.
Yes.
All day long.
Yes.
And because you're such a good scrambler, all right, then you just do that with impunity, right? You just keep sliding through. Maybe that guy's going to come up, chase on a single. Maybe they're going to turn for me, and I'm going to take their back. Or snap them down and go around.
What's nice?
So that's what I mean, right? He's a fundamentally sound wrestler.
Yeah.
And he does one thing, but he takes a very different approach to what we would all, I think, consider to be a very typical standard technique, which is the knee cut.
Yeah.
Right? He's taking the knee cut and supercharged it.
But it's it's the basic knee cut, but he knows everything connected to it.
He's using it to he's not, I'm sure he can against a certain quality of opposition, right? He's not going to do this against Cyborg, right? Or Gordon Ryan.
Why not?
He's not going to do let me finish. He's not going to just do a knee cut to side control, That's not what he wants. I mean, he can do it to me, right? He's so big, he just crush me. But against somebody who's as big as he is, with some skill, you know, he's not looking for that. He's looking for you to come up and turn, right? So my advice to you guys who are out there is don't be a slave to the meta. It'll only get you so far. Don't be a slave to convention.
I was rolling with a person, and I like hatted him, and I realized like I hadn't like hatted anybody in like a long time.
Why is that?
Because I haven't commerred people. And I
Why
realized
haven't you been commemorating people?
because it's
That's not like you, Kevin. Are you okay? You feeling all right?
that's the thing, right? I like stopped doing it, and I was like trying to figure out why.
It's too easy.
It's too easy.
At some point, I remember there were certain things that I used to do that I could just hit on everybody.
Yes.
It got boring.
Yes.
And then I stopped doing them. And then eventually, I got shitty at it. I couldn't do it that well anymore. Everyone caught up to me.
Yeah.
And they realized, you know, they got better.
And then I got a comment from someone like, they also noticed that I hadn't commerred in forever. And they were like, yeah, I remember when you used to commer everybody, people would watch you do it, and then they would start learning from it and like start doing things and like trying to develop their own commerce. And I like started feeling bad because I felt like guilty. He wasn't like trying to guilt me, but like I felt bad because, you know, commer is like, or it was like my thing for a while.
Yes, yeah.
It's like the best thing that I was able to do.
Sure.
And then, how much do I have an obligation to continue doing the best thing for the sake of my students?
I mean, none.
But would it be good to?
If you feel like teaching them, right? If you want to go back to it and teach them how to do it, right? I mean, we all move on, right? Like we all at some point say, right? You recognize, like, look, here's a group of people I train with all the time. I'm able to do this one thing against all of them all the time. But you also are realistic enough to know that you won't be able to hit that on everybody all the time.
Well,
So you got to move on, right? Like you got to develop other parts of your game, and you only have this group of people to work with. So you got to work with them on this.
I think what would be better, and I guess I'm disappointed that this didn't happen, was like usually I do a thing until the rest of the room figures out how to stop it.
Yeah, well, I think your quality is a little bit higher. It's kind of like, I mean, this is an exaggeration, but you know, like Hodger Gracie saying, I'm gonna stop doing this thing. I expect you guys to be able to stop me at some point. Well, I mean, if the quality, the difference between, you know, your training partners and yourself is so vast that they can't really stop you, then, you know, it's.
But still, shouldn't I continue to do it until they figure out how?
You can figure out how to do things. That doesn't mean you're always able to do them.
Yeah. Well,
Under you know, the pressure of.
That's what I'm saying. Like if I continue to do the Kimura on them,
Yeah.
either they will not figure out how to stop it, or they will.
Or you'll blow out their shoulders, or they'll blow their own shoulders out, and they'll get injured, or depressed, or dejected.
I don't know. I can't remember anyone have blown the shoulders out.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that my shoulders went through a period of intense soreness and discomfort.
That's not blown out.
But what I'm saying is, like, I remember, you know, my shoulders. You're right. They're not blown out. They're
sad.
They take a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of wear and tear type punishment, and it's not something that happens overnight. It's just like 1 or 2. It's like after a month, or 2 months, or 3 months, things start to get bad. And it's the same thing. Like when I was climbing the rope, I would climb the rope all the time. Eventually, I get tendonitis, and your body is like, stop doing that, and you kind of have to stop.
But my body wasn't telling me to stop.
No, but your brain was probably like, this is boring. I gotta come up. I gotta do something else just to stay sane.
Well, it's like,
or to feel like you're growing, right?
A lot of it is also like, I don't completely not do Kimuras, but I don't know. It's especially with quarantine, and like just trying to get people in to have some rounds. I don't want to discourage them by smashing.
I'm sure if we trained, you would Kimura me.
Probably.
Yeah.
But you know.
I mean, it's also, I think, a function of, you know, every training partner has a kind of a has their skill level. There's a knowledge level, there's a skill level, and there's also just sort of attitude. And you know, if you're training with people who maybe they have the knowledge, maybe they don't have the skill or the athleticism or the whatever it is, the inclination, you know, like you're gonna get bored.
Yeah.
You know? It's not this, you know, like you are not in a situation as an instructor where you are filled with a room. You're not at Renzo Gracie, you're not at Atos. You know, you're not in a room where there's a natural evolution that occurs because people figure each other out, and you just can't do the same things to those people over and over again, right? Or it just becomes increasingly difficult to do it because they figure you out and they have the capability athletically and technically to stop you from doing it, right? And then they also have the ability to start countering you, right? So it's not just stopping you, but like figuring out ways. So this is the dilemma of being kind of an instructor at a smaller school. You don't have that pressure anymore. You know, like that natural competitive pressure in the room, unless you get the open mats, you go out, you train in other places, you go to competitions.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of high-level competitors who don't come from big schools, right? Or like Lucas Laprie, you know, he has his own school, he runs his own school,
Yeah.
right? He's in Atlanta. I don't know who his training partners are. I think every couple, you know, before every tournament, big tournament, he goes and he trains, does a camp with, you know, other guys from the Alliance, but it's not like day in, day out, he's sitting there doing, you know. But if you're in Sao Paulo at Alliance headquarters, or you're at, you know, Renzo Gracie back in the day, or whatever, you just go to class, you go to training, you're going to be in there with the big boys, you know.
So this is leads me to another question then, because if I don't have this natural cap and I don't feel good about going to other academies right now and finding people to train with.
Yeah.
How bad is it that I let my jiu-jitsu get really weird?
I mean, I think I don't think it's bad or good. I mean, if you're, look, I mean, it always comes back to what is your purpose, what is your goal, what do you want out of your training? Do you want to have fun? You just want to come in and be creative and think and teach and like, okay, that's cool, right? Like, there are great things have been developed by people who are not, you know, killing themselves to make weight and doing hard drill rounds, right, for the next tournament. That's a different type of pressure. It's a totally different goal, right? I don't know that that's even a healthy goal for a lot of people who set it as their goal. Like, forget about whether it's actually something they can realize or achieve. It's like, why are you doing this? Like, is this actually bringing you enjoyment? You know? And some people will say yes and they're sincere, and other people are like, you know,
Is
I don't know.
jiu-jitsu for enjoying?
I think, I don't want to say, like, I don't want to say that there's one, like, I think there is one best way, because I don't think that's true. I think people who want to set competitive goals, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a good thing. If it's healthy, if it works for them, if it's something that makes sense, you know, fulfills them, hey, go for it. Likewise, the people that just like to come in and roll and have whatever experience and not set competition as their primary goal, like formal competition, there's nothing wrong with that either. You know, like, it's what do you get out of it? And I think everyone should enjoy what they're doing, because none of us, or very few of us, are actually making a living out of, like a living out of competitive jiu-jitsu. Even the people who are competing are usually not making their living off of the competitions themselves. Very few people, a tiny percentage of competitors are making money. And even then, like, how much money does Gordon Ryan make from competing? A fraction of what he sells in DVD sales. A fraction, or instructional sales. A tiny fraction. That stuff is just like advertising for him.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have that kind of instructional kind of deal going for you,
Muscle Farm.
yeah, I mean, he's got sponsors, but even if you don't have that, you still have all these seminars.
Oh yeah.
And you could do seminars and make a good, you know, like Craig Jones, who certainly is no slouch when it comes to instructionals, right? He is a whole series, lots of instructionals for him. But I would venture to say that he makes a large amount of money off of seminars, Maybe now it's shifted. You know, maybe now he's shifted over to instructional. But I know he gave an interview where he talked about, you know, starting to give seminars to wherever he was going for his competitions.
Yeah.
And that was like how he made his money. So, you know, even then, the competition part of jiu-jitsu is like a means to the end for these professionals, right? I'm sure they enjoy competing. They enjoy and they're driven by winning or competing at these tournaments and making a name for themselves. I mean, sure, it's not just like, hey, I can't wait to make my next instructional. I got to go win some, you know, some medals. It doesn't work like that. But you know, contrast that with the people who kill themselves, right? And they're never going to see a DVD deal or an instructional deal, and they're never going to go on a seminar circuit. And they're going at a pace, or they're putting in such work that they could really hurt themselves, right? Or just kind of waste their time, right? Like, okay, you're going to go, and that's great. I'm not judging anyone, but if you better make sure that's what you really want. If there's no like pot of money at the end of that rainbow.
That's a good question. How does a person who is training jiu-jitsu decide what they want out of it? And because it like changes, right?
Yeah.
As you go on.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I actually wanted to ask this question about values, but like, you know, goals for jiu-jitsu. Like, let's use me as an example.
To make it personal as possible.
Yeah. Like I have no desire to compete.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted to be a professional jiu-jitsu person,
Okay.
but it's how I enjoy spending my time, and it's like the most valuable thing I think I can do with my time. But that's about all I know. You know, like what is something like what's a way that I can use this and live a happy life? You know, like. Should this be where I am my goal, or should I use where I am and set another goal? Like, what should my goal as a non-competitive jiu-jitsu person be as a black belt? Like, how do I continue doing stuff?
Well, you could look at it a couple different ways. And this is just off the top of my head. You could look at it like, okay, this is what I do. So you kind of break up your day. Like me, I look at my day, right? I look at the time that I spend on anything. And I say, okay, on any given 24-hour period, I'm gonna spend about 8 hours sleeping. Okay, if I can get now, I haven't always done that, right? I've had jobs where I spend 4 hours sleeping, and for a while that's okay, but I like my sleep. So, you know, I don't want to work somewhere where I don't get to sleep, or if I'm going to do that, it's got to be something I really find worthwhile. But you can say like, look, okay, here's my time. What's the other kind of part of your day that is like the bulk of your day? It's usually a job. Most people are working, right? So you can cut into thirds, right? You have an 8 hours sleep. You know, everyone's going to change. Some people sleep 6. My wife sleeps 6 hours sometimes, or 5 hours. Other people, now you're going to have 8 hour work day, right? And then you have 8 hours of like errands and hobbies,
8 hours.
Whatever, 6 hours. I don't know. I'm just making food, whatever it is. All those other things during the day.
Yeah.
You know, hey, I spent an hour going to get coffee, or talking to a friend, or going out, or watching a movie, or whatever it is, right? That's your leisure time, right? Some people, like you can look at that time period or those time periods and say, okay, well, what do I feel most fulfilled by? Some people feel fulfilled by going out and feeding the homeless and taking care of stray animals, and or going to the stock market and making lots of money in the stock market. They feel like some sort of fulfillment for themselves doing that thing. The more they can do that, the better they feel, right? I mean, it's kind of simplistic, right? Other people are like, I want to spend time with my family, and I just want to like work less. Keep my sleep constant, and spend more 10 hours a day with my family. I want to be a stay-at-home parent or something like that. Yeah. Or have a job that allows me to stay with, like these things. It's like, you have your obligations, but you also have your discretionary. Like, well, I like to do the things I like to do. I want to maximize those things. And then you can look at also from the perspective of, well, what can I do from here, right? Like, if you're going to say to yourself, okay, I'm a jiu-jitsu professional. I teach jiu-jitsu for a living, right? That's what I do. I compete sometimes, but that's not what my focus is. Well, what are the things you can do as a teaching black belt, right? You can make your students better, right? You can make the school better, right? In various different ways. So those are two things that just come off the top of my head, right? Like, okay, how do I make my students better? Now that could be a whole slew of other things, right? I can help spread, use jiu-jitsu as a way to help people reduce stress in their lives. I get a lot of fulfillment by helping people just find jiu-jitsu as a way to like de-stress their lives, right? Other times it's like, I like to coach people and I want to coach these people to, maybe they have competitive, dreams. Other people might say, hey, I want to be a jiu-jitsu innovator. I want to come up with new techniques and ways of thinking about things, and I'm going to put out my instructionals. Even though I'm not a high-level competitor, I have my ideas, and I'm going to spread my gospel, my technique to the world. And that could be through your students. It could be through building the school up. It could be, like all those different things. And you have to, I think each one of those things you have to say, do I feel fulfilled, right? You could, like, developing the business is a whole other thing. And some people don't want to do it. They don't like it. My wife is interested in opening a bakery. She's like kind of toyed with this idea. So she did this webinar with this famous person who basically did what my wife sometimes thinks she wants to do. And the person's talking about opening up her own bakery, like the process of opening up her own bakery. And, at first blush, you might think it's like, oh, you gotta have a great recipe, and you gotta do this, it's all in the kitchen, and da-da-da. No, it has nothing to do with that. She's like, brass tacks, numbers, get out your calculators. This is how we have to figure everything out because we're in a business about money.
Yeah.
It's about money in, money out. How do you get it? Or how do you spend it? How do you get it back? How do you pay it back if you have investors or to yourself? And so these things all have calculations, and that's true for every business. Not every business is run this way, but if you want to build a business, generally you got to get down into the weeds of the numbers, right? And figure out all those formulas and calculations about how you're going to maximize, whatever the revenues and the profits are, and minimize whatever your expenditures are, your overhead. And that's that continual dance. So you got to talk about leases, negotiating leases. You got to talk about insurance. You got to talk about, like all this other stuff. And some people, their eyes glaze over and they have no interest whatsoever in, how much do I pay my cleaning service?
Yeah.
So if that's not what your thing is, then, like you have to be upfront with that. Like, are you going to be fulfilled doing it? Right? You see what I'm saying? Like, you have to judge your own level of fulfillment from each one of those things. You already know that you're not fulfilled by pursuing the life of a competitive jiu-jitsu athlete. You've already you know that about yourself.
Pretty sure.
So I always thought of it for myself, and everything is like, what do I enjoy doing? Like, what am I good at, and those could be two different things. What you're good at and what you enjoy could be very different. But generally, I think if you are good at something, you generally enjoy doing it. Generally. You can burn yourself out.
I really enjoy doing nothing. And that's also part of the reason why I like doing jiu-jitsu so much. Because, like, if you're really good at it, you can do nothing or as close to nothing as possible and still, have a positive result. And the idea of...
That's not really true. I mean, you have to work.
No.
You have to work really hard to get to the point where you can do nothing and still be successful.
That's the thing, right? Like, there's that weird dichotomy where if you want to enjoy being a baker, you have to go through this of like being a business person.
This woman doesn't even bake anymore. She said one person asked them, like, how much time do you spend in the kitchen? She's like, none.
So
I don't spend
why open bakery?
This is the thing that people don't understand. It's the same thing, like when I was a lawyer, everyone thinks, right, oh, I'm just gonna go. Being a lawyer means going to court or whatever it is, whatever version, doing the deal, if you're more into the corporate side of things. But when you want to open your own firm, it's all fun and games, right? It's all fun and games when you're the associate or you're the partner and you're part of a bigger, or you work at a government agency. And you don't have to worry about the lights going on, who's going to pay the bills, who's going to collect the money, the bills, who's going to pay out, who's going to administer. No one ever, I never had to think about that.
Yeah.
I never had to think about that, right? When you go out on your own or you want to become, a highly successful lawyer, like you need to know how to run the business.
Yeah.
Because, and people don't teach you that. They don't teach you about accounting. They don't teach you about how to making sure you get paid.
Yeah.
Right? They don't tell you, right, all the things that you need to know, right, about running the business of a law firm.
Yeah.
And this is true even in big companies. A lot of companies now, they have like the CEO who's like doing certain things, and then they had the chief operating officer who was making sure that all the day-to-day stuff, all the administrative stuff that usually used to fall under the CEO's, purview, is now they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
They can just worry about the high-level stuff that really needs to get done. And then they have a COO who's a chief operating officer who's off doing all the grunt work of running a company.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Do you think are there people out there? I'm sure there are a lot of people, but like who are passionate about being a COO?
Oh yeah, sure. So some people don't want to deal with the politics. Some people don't want to deal with, the stress or the limelight. They don't want to be that. They don't want to be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're more the person behind the scenes, and I think a lot of people are comfortable with that. And
would you say that's
like there were a lot of lawyers I knew who were like, they were awesome. They were super smart. They could write. They could analyze things. They were really, really good. They knew the law, but you would never put them up in front of a judge or put them in front of a client because they would just freeze, right? They would just all, gobbledygook all of a sudden. And the person would be like, who the hell is this person? They could barely put a sentence together, right? And then there are other people who don't know shit and are terrible lawyers, but they're smooth as butter in front of the client, or they're really good in front of the judge.
Yeah.
They're just really good on their feet. And so you need, sometimes you have those people who are really good, present really well, have gravitas, and seem really smart, but there's brains behind, under the hood. And it's not those guys,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Why did you open a school? We've talked about this.
Because I wanted to make lots of money. It was just pure profit for me, man. I hate jiu-jitsu, but I figured it's such a high profit industry, so easy to make money, that it was like, so easy, I gotta just do it. That was because I love jiu-jitsu and I wanted to
you could
do jiu-jitsu, right? Have a school.
There are academies around to go to and do jiu-jitsu. What is the benefit of having your own school?
It's nice to be the boss.
Yeah.
Right? It's also, for me, I think, I wanted to have a little bit of a different school. I wanted to really focus on kids. That was my first thing. My first thought was, nobody really has a good kids program. There are schools that have kids programs. They're not really, I would not want to, when I was looking around, I was like, I wouldn't bring my kids to any of these other kids programs. Either they're too small, or I didn't like how they were being coached, or, they just weren't there, they didn't have it, and so I thought, I want to open a place up that really caters directly to kids and parents and families. And then same thing with an adult program. I didn't want to have a school, there's a lot of schools where their focus is on competition,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or their focus is on something else, right? It's not really on the students themselves, getting the students to realize, some places are you're going to learn my method, and I'm going to teach you how to be badass and all this stuff, and that's fine, I guess, but I think I have a different perspective on jiu-jitsu than a lot of those other places, and I thought it would be, I had a different perspective in the jiu-jitsu world coming from where I come from. There's a lot of places that are kind of needlessly gung-ho, bow to your sensei.
No eye contact.
Type of places, right? It's that doesn't, I wanted to do more no-gi. There was no no-gi when I came in.
Yeah.
Very few places that were doing no-gi. Nobody was ever allowed to do any leg locks. For me to do the jiu-jitsu that I wanted to do, I kind of felt like Heroes was good, but I came to Heroes late. I only came to Heroes because it was far. It was I had to go to San Jose.
Yeah.
I was going to a very traditional school when I first got here. And I was like, this is not the type of, probably I started thinking about opening my own place because of that place. Because I was like, this is not cool.
Yeah.
This is not how it should be run.
Yeah.
It wasn't legit in my mind. And I was like, if this is the best option, there needs to be another option for people, because that was not the.
This might be too personal of a question, business-wise, but did you was the numbers part the foundation of it, or was
What do you
it
mean the numbers part?
before you were I'm gonna open a gym?
Yeah.
Did you do the math and
Mhm.
see if it would work, and you're like, yeah, this is good, or were you like, I'm gonna open up a gym, and then you did the math?
No. You open the you do the math first, right? You do a business plan and you do your projections and you look at all like what your costs are going to be, what your like how long of runway you have, meaning how much money do you have, right? How much is your lease going to be? How much is your equipment? How much is your all the other stuff that go into opening up a school? How much is all the license? How much is insurance? How much is the cleaning? How like you have to set all those things up. Get that number.
But you can't know for sure how many students you're gonna bring.
No, so you have to estimate.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and so the other thing about that is, you can make your business plan suit, again, your goal. My goal in opening up a school was never to make as much money as possible, right? I mean, there are people that depend for their livelihoods on the revenue from the school, the profit from the school. And so they're going to make very different decisions than I was able to make, right? So if you have to worry about, like, I need to make money from this school, I have a very limited pool of money, or whatever it is, a finite amount of money, so I have so much runway, right? I signed a lease for 3 or 5 years, or maybe more, maybe less. So I've got this much time, and this is my overhead. I need to get bodies in the door, I need to get classes going, I need to set this kind of tuition, I need to make sure I'm getting this kind of numbers of people coming in and minimizing the numbers of people going out, right? Because you always have churn. And so, if I were somebody who was like, I need to just make money, I need to pay my mortgage, or I need to pay my bills from the money generated from this place, right? I probably would not have been in a small place like this in a very nice building, right? I would have minimized my lease. I would have gotten much cheaper space. It wouldn't have been this nice. I wouldn't have built it out, right? I had to invest all that to build this out, to make it at this location, right? So my goal was not, I wanted to make it so that the school was financially independent, right? It was self-sustaining, right? Which does mean you have to be, revenue positive,
Yeah.
right? Because you can't just be revenue neutral. That does not work. You have to aim for plus. And that's what it did until the pandemic, right? It was growing, it was basically doubling every year. So it's been on track. Like financially, the school, and even with the pandemic, it's not that bad. But it's not bad to the point of some schools have to close. They just can't pay their bills.
Yeah.
And they don't look at any time period where they're going to be able, anytime soon, that they're going to be revenue positive, right? So, or neutral for that matter. So, you have to, for me, I looked at my goal, which was, it was not pegged to, I need to make a living off of this. And so I could make, and I have certain, I have a certain investment that I was comfortable making in the school. And, that allowed me to make all the decisions along the way. But when you have different restraints, right? I only have so much to start with. Well, then you're gonna have to start from a different point. Like some people start schools at rec centers. They start teaching classes at a rec center, or they start teaching classes at somebody else's school. Like Henzo didn't start off with his own academy. He borrowed space from other places. It's famous, like Peggy's Kung Fu School. And I remember going there, and in the very early days, and when I was in law school, and it was basically like a little bit of space in front of Peggy. It was a Kung Fu school, and they would put mats out. You can look at videos of it, and I don't know what he paid to do that, but when you are just starting out and you have limited funds or resources, you have to find other accommodations. So you rent like Chuck Jefferson. He had his own, well actually he didn't have his own space. He was renting space from Kalipa, right? From NC Fit, because Kalipa had that old building over on Saratoga. And then when that got condemned and Kalipa moved out of there, Chuck moved over to rent space out of the fitness gym. And so he doesn't have his own freestanding school. He's always, for the time that I've known him, he's always had other space inside of other people's spaces. And he does that for financial reasons, right? Because the expenses of a lease are prohibitive for the goals that he has. I mean, he's not, he has other sources of income, my understanding, you know, and so he's not solely dependent upon his judo school to pay his bills. So, you know, he's made other arrangements based on his financial situation, right? And what his goals are for that school. You know, but if you're like, I want to, you know, I need to roll in my Mercedes and I need to have a big house and I want to be rich and go on nice vacations, as a jiu-jitsu school owner, you're going to run a very different operation than the one I'm running right now. It's going to look completely different.
Do you think it would be, how different? Like, would it be better, worse?
Well, I'll put it this way,
different?
and I don't think this is true of every school, right? I definitely don't think it was true at Henzo's. There are a lot of schools, especially when you're not Henzo Gracie, you don't have that name or pedigree or, you know, record, where, you know, the incentive, the financial incentives are skewed to the point where you don't really look at students as human beings anymore. You look at them as, you know, revenue generating opportunities, right? And I've heard people talk about their members, and it's not just jiu-jitsu schools, but members as, you know, as essentially like, how do we extract as much? They're like an extractable resource. They're like a hill that's filled with gold, right? And it's like, how do I get as much gold out of that hill as possible, right? And so every discussion is, how do I maximize my revenue off of like, what's my revenue per student? And you should know this anyway. You should know what your average revenue per student is anyway. But if every day I walk in, I'm like, how do I raise my revenue per student every day, right? That's my goal. I need to get more money out of you, Kevin. How do I get more money out of you, right? That is a very different attitude than looking at you and saying, hey, how do I get Kevin better at jiu-jitsu? And how do I make Kevin happier as a person? You see what I'm saying? Like, if I'm like, how do I get more money out of Kevin? Then I start talking about, like, I'm gonna charge for every belt test. And I'm gonna charge for water. And I'm gonna charge for, and I'm gonna start selling you supplements. And I'm gonna start, you know, selling you private lessons. And I'm gonna start selling you, you know, hey, I need you to like sign some other people up. And I need you to do this. And, you know, like, oh, I need you to pay for this. You know, oh, you want to use the showers? I need $1 from you every time you use the shower. You know, whether you're using my towel or not. You know, like all these things, right? Oh, I'm going to sell this to you. I'm going to sell that to you. Oh, I need you to buy a dummy. You know, like I'm going to everything. Oh, you have kids? Oh, let's sign your kids up. Let's get them in here.
Yeah.
You know, like, and it's going to be like that high. It's like going to. I'm going to pick on UFC gym for a second, but I actually think they give a really good product.
Yeah.
I think a UFC gym is a really good deal for most people. I'm not using this as a criticism, but you know what they do is you sign up for like $75 a month or whatever it is. It's a very low price for sign up, and you get a ton of services for that, right? A ton of stuff. It's a great deal. But then they start upselling, right? And then it's like, hey, if you want to really, you know, we're going to give you a one-time discount. We're going to sell you 10 private lessons, right? And they'll get you in these classes. They'll give you free classes, and then they'll be like. The class instructor will come over and be like, hey, I noticed that you're working hard, let's take it to the next level. You know, let's buy 10 classes and I'll bring you to the next level. And then you're like, okay, 10 classes, that sounds good. And they'll be like, all right, well, you know what we really need to do is get you on some supplements because that's really gonna support what you're doing. And then they bring you over to the little store that they have.
It's the arm bar.
What's that? Is that what it's called? The arm bar?
The arm bar.
The arm bar. And they're like, all right, let's get you up on some creatine and whatever other crap they use, you know, protein and some multivitamins, supplements. And hey, we're having a sale on these t-shirts and shorts, you need some gear. And then all of a sudden you walk out and you just spent $500 on just your supplements and, you know, $1,000 on your private lessons and, you know, whatever, $200 on your gear, you know, and then, you know, you're $2,000 poorer when you walk out. And then, you know, that's how they get you. And it'll be the same thing here. If I'm like, if what we did is I said we had a meeting every week. This is what we used to do at UFC gym.
Yeah.
Every week it would be like, all right, Kevin, let's talk. And you got compensated based on how many private lessons you sold, and how many supplements you sold, and how many t-shirts you sold, and I came to you and I said, hey, listen, Kevin, you have a quota every month. I need you to upsell people at least $10,000 a month. And I'm gonna give you, your pay will be contingent. I'm gonna give you a percentage of that, right? So I need you to start, you're selling private lessons and you're selling t-shirts and rash guards and shorts and gis, and you know what I mean? Like, and that's how it is. And now all of a sudden you're just like, yeah, I need to get the numbers.
Yeah.
That's the deal.
But there has to be like, you can't neglect that side entirely, right?
No, I'm not saying that. But like, what I'm saying is if you want to run it like a real business,
yeah,
this is where you're going. Now, I'm not to say everybody does it this way. It's like, well, you're a corporation. Like, if you're a corporation, I want to see numbers. I want to see money coming.
yeah.
We're not doing this to break even. You know what I mean? So, and I don't say any of that as a criticism of anybody who's trying to make a living off of jiu-jitsu, right? Now, I think there's a right way and an ethical way to go about it. Some people cross the line, some people do a good job, you know, and I'm not in their position, so I'm not judging them, but I don't personally I wouldn't have gotten into this business if I needed to exploit, if I felt like I needed to exploit anybody or pressure anybody to do anything in jiu-jitsu. Like, that's just not what I want. But at the same time, like, hey, there is a good way to go about and say, like, I need to make, like, people who work hard should get compensated. There are people who charge for belt fees and belt tests who, they're not doing a bad job. I mean, just, they need to make money too. They need to pay. It's not cheap to live in the Bay Area, right? So it's not meant as a criticism. It's just like, it's a different perspective on things. You know what I mean? So, but again, it's, what is your purpose? What is your purpose?
Well, it's weird because like, even if like your purpose is teaching good jiu-jitsu and making people enjoy their lives and their time there, like your business still has to stay competitive to stay alive, right? Like you still need to bring in that money. But I've seen situations where like they overdid it and people left, and it's not an enjoyable environment anymore.
They hit you up with those hidden fees.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've seen, like, the Taekwondo schools, they'll charge you, like, an initiation fee, and then they give you, like, it's like $500 to just start the classes.
Yeah.
You know? That's before you set them, that's even before you pay your tuition.
But it's also, like, there's something about, because I was around an old Taekwondo school growing up, and, like, the owners had, like, the nicest cars, and, like, everything was good. And there was like this image of success that they created, and it like drew students in, and it was like, you know, people were really responsive to that. And it was just like you could spend your time getting the students better at jiu-jitsu, but like that's not the best way to get people in the door. And like with jiu-jitsu schools, like a good jiu-jitsu school can have a good instructor, but a really good jiu-jitsu school has a lot of students and a lot of people participating. So you have a lot of training partners, and it's, I don't know, that weird balance of like having to focus on getting people in the door and like advertising, and not focusing on jiu-jitsu can still down the line like improve people's jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
But,
Yes. I mean, I think, you know, like I said, it's not necessarily an either-or proposition. You can be a successful business, you know, a martial arts business owner or jiu-jitsu school owner, and be, you know, be financially successful and do it ethically, right? And still have the best interests of your students at heart. And you could be, you know, totally cool and laid back, and then, you know, your jiu-jitsu school could crater, right? Or you could be totally aggro and run a totally like mercenary jiu-jitsu school that all it cares about is the money. It's not a great school, right? Like, it's not. It's just like, what do I want, right? Like, what do I want to do, right? Like, as the owner, what is my goal? And my goal is not to extract like as much money from people as possible. That's not my goal.
But what's nice about,
I want to extract just as much as I need to keep the lights on, right? And make it so that people can come and train.
But at least with money, you can like, it's concrete, you know? Like you can look at a number.
It is and it isn't, because sometimes the money is deceptive. Sometimes you can boost your sale. Like I could boost my revenues by doing certain things,
Mhm.
right? I can boost my rates up, right? A certain percentage, whatever it is, and my revenues will go way up, right? From that, I could start mandating. I can make it mandatory that people only wear samurai jiu-jitsu gear, right? You could do different things. I could start belt test, like any sort of testing fee. I could do open mat fees. I've seen people charge for open mat fees. Yeah, you could do a thing where, sparring is separate from technical.
Yeah, you gotta buy in.
You gotta buy in. It's a different program. And there's a competition program over here, and that costs extra because I have to coach you.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm gonna go to the tournaments. And you can slice and dice it and make things, and you can raise your revenues, right? All sorts of different ways. But your revenues can go up, but people's satisfaction can go down with all that. And you can feel like I've seen people who, they put in all their focus on like a small group of people for whatever reason. Maybe it's that competition group, or maybe it's we used to have like the Brazilian inner circle, where it was like the Brazilian teacher, and then there were only the Brazilians, and he would only coach them and only teach them the good stuff and whatever. And at some point, people are like, they get demoralized, and they feel like they're getting cheated, and they're not cheated, but they're not getting the attention that they think they deserve, and then they leave, even though now you've made more money in the short run. You shoot yourself in the foot in the long run. And so again, what's your goal? What's your purpose? And are you working across purposes from what you wanted to accomplish in the first place?
That's a good question.
Right. So how do you get back to just get back to like your original question of like values, and how do you? I mean, the first thing is like, well, when you decide what you want to do with yourself, you gotta first. I think there's two things, right? Like, what am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? What fulfills me? I guess that's three things.
I already do all those things.
Well, there you go. Then you are living the dream.
Oh, I don't want to fulfill my life goals now. It's far too early.
Well, I mean, but you've got to find, like I said before, right? If you've already found like this is kind of the setting, the general setting that you enjoy, that you feel fulfilled in, then you have to like push. It's like John. John is in a basement, or was in a basement for 20 years. Basically doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't have any windows. Okay, so and what did he do? He was like, okay, at some point the school got big enough, and he has enough talented students. He had a lot of people that he got a lot better. And then at some point, George St. Pierre comes in, and at some point he gets Gordon Ryan and Gary Tonin, and who knows how many people, and he starts developing. That did not happen overnight. He didn't just walk downstairs one day and was like, all right, I'm going to introduce leg attacks to the jiu-jitsu world. He kind of evolved into that over a long period of time. This is not, I don't know anybody who's like Henzo, started for Peggy's Kung Fu School. That was not an auspicious start, let me tell you. And then there was the place over the methadone clinic, and the hot dog place, Mike's Papaya. That's what it was called. That's not an auspicious start.
Yeah.
So it's not. I think the deal is that you have to like kind of look. I'm not even sure they had a vision of their success. Like, I mean, if you had asked John 10 years ago what his vision of success was, I'm not sure that it would be what he is currently doing. Because you didn't have things like first of all, BJJ Fanatics did not exist 10 years ago. It has a major income stream for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And before, because of the dynamics of the DVD instructional industry, right, where you did not have access, like it was expensive. It was expensive relatively to like physically create a DVD. Right? You had to shoot this stuff, first of all, right? That was expensive to get all that equipment. And then you had to go and mass produce these DVDs, and then you had to distribute them, and you had to market them. And so what would happen is, it would be like, all right, Kevin, you're going to sign away your rights to this, and I'm going to own it, because that's how I have to protect, like in the music industry, the film industry.
Yeah.
You're not going to own what you put out. Marcelo Garcia and Ryan Hall and all those guys, they don't own the videos that they made 15 years ago.
Yeah.
They belong to the publishers, and so they made less money. Famous story about Henzo is that I was actually a little bit after my time, but I had a major falling out with Craig Kukuk. I don't know if you remember the name Craig Kukuk.
Kukuk?
Kukuk.
Kukuk.
Kukuk. He was like an American Jiu Jitsu pioneer. He was one of the first. I think he was a member of the Dirty Dozen. And if not, then he was closely followed behind. But he had a major falling out because he essentially, the story that I heard was that, they had a falling out over money over Renzo's DVDs. The first kind of set, the first 12-volume set that Renzo ever put out, they had a major falling out over. I don't know the deal. I don't know who's right, who's wrong. Obviously I heard one version of the story, but I'm not saying anything bad about Craig Kuka. I don't know the story, but I know that there had been a falling out, and that was my understanding of why. Now, the athletes, it's easy to get a bigger piece of the money because, look at Keenan. Keenan has his own website, right? And now other people are using his website to do their DVDs. And so athletes can now put out their own material on their own websites. And so if you're BJJ fanatics, you have to offer them something, right? They get a bigger slice of the pie because it's easy to put this stuff up. Anybody can make an instructional DVD right now.
Yeah.
Anyone with your laptop, you can make an instructional DVD in your house.
Yeah.
Right? So the ease with which things are made and distributed, and you can make a website. That's like you could put up an instructional and website, in probably a week. It would be pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you really wanted to. It's not that hard. So now the athletes get a bigger slice of the pie. And so, now John has 25 DVDs or instructional series that he can put out the way that he wants them. It's so easy. Remember, I don't know if you remember the first DVD or the first instructional series he put out, which was on DVD as well. They had major sound issues, and so they wound up reshooting the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I
in
remember
2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And before that was nobody would ever reshoot anything. You would just overdub it. I remember a lot of stuff was dubbed.
Ugh.
It was terrible. I remember there was one series that I'm pretty sure that the person, there was actually more than one, where the person essentially just did a DVD in their apartment in Brazil, and you could hear the street traffic,
Yeah.
and you could hear all the horns and the police sirens and stuff like that. And it was all that
It's
stuff.
like
The
waiting for
audio
it to
sucked,
pass.
and there were DVDs that didn't even have any audio. And you were, there was a Cobrinha series that came out that originally had been in Japanese. It was released in Japan, and one of my friends got a hold of it and gave me a copy. And it didn't have any sound on it because what's the point? It's in Japanese anyway. And it was all just a bunch of videos that had been shot, and they spliced them together.
Like tournament footage, or
There was tournament footage, there was training footage, there was just instructional footage, but he was speaking in Portuguese, and it was dubbed and subtitled in Japanese.
Yeah.
And by the time I got it, I think it was just they had just taken out the sound. They were just like, there's no point, and the sound is a distraction.
Yeah, they just ripped it out.
But yeah, the economics have changed, but that's now you see John has gravitated to this. He has a bunch of athletes that all put out DVDs underneath his kind of not franchise, but under his kind of auspices. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So his athletes are putting out Gary puts out Exit the System and
We're all talking
In
about
Between the System, and it's all
systems.
Gordon is puts out some version or some elaboration of what John has already put out.
Yeah.
But how he does it.
But on a smaller, useless partner.
Well, you can, and now everyone has systems. Everyone has a system. Everything's a system, and everyone's accessing the lever and using and deploying the wedges.
This is part of my reason why I'm shying away from approaching jiu-jitsu from a systematic, logical perspective, because there's already so much information out there that there's nothing else that I as an individual can provide.
I think so. Here's the thing, right? John's instructionals are very comprehensive, but they are not for everybody. There's a great way that I have to go to sleep at night. And that's just putting on one of John's instructionals, because and I enjoy it, and I actually like his style of teaching, but it is it does put you to sleep if you're talking. If you need to get to sleep.
Yeah, just put the lights on.
And so the thing is with John is that he'll go and he'll spend a whole volume of instructions about concepts.
Yeah.
you won't learn any real jiu-jitsu in that, like, or very little actual technical jiu-jitsu in that moment. But you'll learn a lot about grips, and you'll learn about wedges and levers, and, you know, and mechanics, and those sort, which are all very important, right? But he's gonna lay those all out for you. He's gonna talk to you for an hour, and that's not for everybody. Some people, like, and this is what Gordon essentially does. He cuts out all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he'll still give you all the meat and potatoes of what John's teaching, but he takes out all that stuff. And he just kind of assumes you know all of it. And he might make references or allusions to it, but then he gets to just kind of like, okay, this is what I do. If they do this, I do that. If they do that, I do this. Right? And this is important. He'll show you the mechanics. He'll show you there's the concepts, and then there's the what's the other thing they call it? There's the concepts, and then there's something else. Principles. Yeah, so principles and concepts. And there'll be in John's, there'll be two different volumes of the set.
Wait, what?
And with Gordon, he does what? So instead of having 2 volumes of concepts and principles, Gordon has 2 volumes of training footage, which you don't get in John's.
Yeah.
Right? And so and some people learn better visually by watching what one high-level competitor does to another or other competitors, so they can actually see it. As opposed to other people who are like, no, I really want to understand all the principles and all the whys and wherefores and whatevers.
Yeah. I do like. What's the difference between concepts and principles?
I think so. Concepts, I think, would be just general concepts, right? Like the wedges and the levers and those types of things.
Okay.
And then maybe like how the body works, right? Like getting your elbow high when you're doing a kimura or whatever, right? Whereas the principles are more focused. Now I could be totally mixing this up, but the principles are more about like that particular technical question.
What?
Right. So I can talk about wedges and levers and triangle, whatever it is. But and I can apply them to anything. Right?
Outside of jiu-jitsu or in jiu-jitsu?
Probably outside of jiu-jitsu too, but in jiu-jitsu it's like these things they're general concepts that cut across they're like the fundamental building blocks of all technical jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
Right? Principles, now I could be totally forgetting what they actually say, but my sense right now is that it's more like the principles of like Kimura. Like how are we now applying these concepts to this particular version of a Kimura? You see what I'm saying?
So a concept is a subset of...
Or vice versa. I don't know. I mean, it could be the other way around. I don't know. But these are 2 different things, right? Like, okay, I can talk about levers, and I can talk about triangles. Like, a triangle is something that is important to know about in jiu-jitsu. You use it a lot. Now, how am I going to use these triangles when I'm talking about the triangle in jiu-jitsu? Or how am I going to use it when I'm using it when I'm doing arm locks? Or how am I using the wedge when I'm talking about back attacks?
So like theory and application?
Yes.
Interesting.
Now some people don't want to know any of that stuff. Some people don't care.
I really like that.
And you could, like someone like Wagner Hocha, which I really liked his first. So he was one of the first guys I think that came out with the Kimura trap. I mean, there was the Avellans. They had their Kimura trap. I think they were the first people to actually talk about it in those terms. And then Wagner Hocha came out, and he had this whole funnel system, right? Remember the funnel?
I've heard of it.
The funnel. So he would talk about the funnel, about getting okay, we want to do Kimura traps, so we're funneling everything to a Kimura trap, right? And so that's like I think that would be more of what I would think of as a principle or a way to like get to where you want to go.
Like a strategic.
Yeah, like how do I handle in any given position, how do I get to what I want to get to? What's my strength? I want to do Kimura traps. I like Kimura traps, right? Or taking the back, or leg attacks, whatever it is, right? Like, how do I get to this point the quickest from wherever I'm at?
That's a principle?
Could be. Could be a strategy. Could be a tactic. I don't know.
I might have to watch it.
It's pretty good stuff.
I dislike watching technical videos, but I will listen to a person like just drone on about like philosophy, like about jiu-jitsu. If it's like concepts and principles, I'm about that. Like I just like new ways. I like new words. I like learning new ways to describe what's happening.
Sure.
And that's one thing that John really excels at, like the ability to describe what's happening in a way that is communicable.
Yes.
So
he's
good.
a good teacher.
I want to be as good as that, but I know I can't be. So I want to go into the weirder stuff where you're just learning jujitsu by experiencing it, and your familiarity with what's going on develops naturally, and then you're able to describe it with words and stuff. But I feel like the overall
Non-verbal jiu-jitsu?
yeah, like I feel
Emotional
like,
jiu-jitsu?
like a person's understanding doesn't happen in the parts of the brain that says words for jiu-jitsu, right? Like when you truly understand and are able to do jiu-jitsu, like that's not happening with the part that's able to describe what's happening.
Depends on who you are.
True. For I think the higher you go in the sport or in the game, the less it becomes, about the what's the word, like not the tree but
The forest?
no
The branches?
what's the big sheet of this is not tree. What's the map that the Gordons and the Danahers put out about like the everything in jiu-jitsu? Flowchart.
Flowcharts. Yeah. I think flowcharts are terrible.
Yeah, it's like flowcharts are good, but like when you're doing jiu-jitsu, you're not just thinking about
Right.
your flowchart. It's,
I mean, I think the interesting thing to me has always been, when you have high-level competitors talking about like how to do what they do, and like I could never. There's very few instances where I'm like, oh yeah, I just do what Marcelo told me to do this, and I just do it. No, there's something else that's intangible that they are not communicating. That's very difficult to communicate, if not impossible, about how they do what they do.
yeah,
Right? And they can explain it to you, right? They can explain what they're thinking or how they articulate it. But just because Hodger tells you how he does the things that he does not mean that you will be able to go out and do what Hodger does,
yeah,
right? I mean, there is that part of, I think this is true of all kind of sports and maybe activities, right? There's a point where you kind of intellectually are told what you do or what you should do or what you can do. And then there's the part where you go and you do what you can actually do.
yeah,
And those two are not always the same things, which is the fun part of jiu-jitsu, right? If Rickson Gracie could just come in and be like, Kevin, just do A, B, C, and D,
yeah,
jiu-jitsu would be and you could just do A, B, C, and D and just beat everybody up like Rickson Gracie. Jiu-jitsu would be boring. It would not be a thing that anybody would really care that much about, right? It'd be kind of like driving a car.
yeah.
Right? I mean, there are definitely ways that are very difficult, right? Go race in NASCAR or Formula One. That is very hard to do, but the vast majority of people are never like, driving a car is challenging or even fun, like I just drive my car. If jiu-jitsu were like that, if I could just be like, okay, here's how you do jiu-jitsu the way that you drive a car, it would be boring. Nobody would want, only a few people would be ever interested in like, I don't know about you, but I've never been like, hey, it would be awesome to be a Formula One driver. Never.
But I think jiu-jitsu is like driving a car.
It can be in certain ways, but the way I'm using it is the way of like, it's something like driving a car is very routine. Almost any idiot can drive. Not well necessarily, but like everybody drives a car.
Yeah,
Everybody drives a car.
yeah.
It's, you turn it on and you use the wheel and you press on the gas.
Do you remember being like 16 and learning how to drive?
Yeah, it was terrifying.
Right.
And but 2 days later, I was like,
2 days.
This is easy.
2 days.
A week.
A week.
Whatever.
Uh-huh.
It's super easy. It's super easy.
Yeah, it like becomes like
It's a mechanical thing. It's just like, it's not hard.
But it takes time.
It does. It takes a little bit more time to get comfortable enough to do stupid stuff and get, in
trouble.
trouble. But what I'm using, and I guess there are other ways where driving can be a lot like jiu-jitsu, not in a negative way, but the way I'm using it is like this almost like routine, easy, here's your driver's manual, here's a bunch of rules, and you just memorize it, get your license,
Yeah.
go, and you're just able to go and get on the road.
No, you gotta drive.
Like you can't just give somebody, like, oh, here's what jiu-jitsu is about, get on the mat, and that person will be relatively competent in jiu-jitsu. No, it's like if driving were like jiu-jitsu, the highways would be filled with accidents.
They are.
No, but like really filled, like everybody would be like if every driver was like a white belt. Think about it. I don't know about you, but when I was a white belt, I got destroyed in every match. Like even the other white belts would destroy me.
Yeah.
Right? I'd walk in, every day would just be another lesson in defeat and humiliation.
Yeah.
And just imagine if every time you went out and drove your car for the first year, you just wound up crashing and burning.
Different. Let me.
No, but I'm using this analogy.
Let me show you why the analogy breaks apart. Right? With like.
I'm not saying it's a fair analogy. I'm using it as like an example. Like if you were as a driver, if you were like a white belt driver and you failed as often as white belts do in jiu-jitsu, there'd be like everybody would be crashing their car.
Yeah,
5 times on the way home.
Because like you don't.
It is, of course it's different. I'm just using it as an analogy and a silly one at that.
All right.
It's just humor.
Okay.
Maybe it's not funny. I'm sorry.
I don't know. It made me think of like what would happen if, like, when you went to jujitsu, if you knew you would get choked to death if you messed up. Like, what would your approach be if like
You wouldn't go to jiu-jitsu.
No,
You'd
like,
stay home.
someone might go to jujitsu.
Nobody. If the
People drive all the time.
if the
they're like, "I might
downside
die."
was, hey, listen, dude, I'm not saying I will choke you to death, but there's a good chance that you will die. Most people, it's like
People drive all the time. You could drive. You could die when you drive.
that's
People
true.
set
The
that
vast majority of the time you do not die.
Right, and then you specifically drive in a certain way to not die.
Yes.
Right. So then when you do jujitsu, if that was the case, your approach to training is going to be very different.
It probably would be, but I don't know that there's. Well, I guess you have to say. I mean, of course, you know the reason the analogy is absurd is because the consequences for each one is different.
Yeah.
If you were to match up the consequence, right? So yes, any driver, no matter what your skill level, runs the risk at any moment that they're going to get slammed into by another driver, and you are going to wind up in the hospital or die, right?
Or they themselves do something stupid.
Or yeah, you could do something stupid. You could slam into somebody else. You could run a red light, or you could, play with the radio and be texting, drinking, driving, whatever, and you could slam into somebody and kill them or hurt them really badly. If jiu-jitsu had the same likelihood of death and dismemberment on the same, people wouldn't do it.
Probably not as many.
I mean, there's minor injuries, like spraining your ankle or dislocating your shoulder. Like yes, you will go to the hospital, but it's not generally not. Like you have to be knock on wood. You have to be really dumb to like run the risk of death in jiu-jitsu.
It has to be worth it. People drive all the time. Run the risk of death driving all the time to go to the store, right? Like
You're probably well. I don't know what the actual odds are, but
the odds are low, but they're there.
say goodbye, Kevin. I gotta go home.
All right, bye, Kevin.
To be continued.